As stated, today's topic is threat hunting in the Office 365 ecosystem. So there was a brief introduction about myself, founder of 7Elements, security consultancy based up in Edinburgh, but we're delivering work across the whole of the UK and internationally, and our day job is penetration testing and incident response. And what we're really doing is bringing our attack-led knowledge from the penetration testing and finding new vulnerabilities and exploits, and that understanding of how an attacker behaves into the incident response side. So we're bringing that knowledge in, and that works really well in playing out those possible scenarios, working out how an attacker could have caused a compromise, and then helping clients to remediate. And as part of that, we're getting involved more and more in Office 365-based compromises. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to bring some of that knowledge to you guys today, some of the things that we've learned, some of the tricks to doing it, and hopefully you'll find it of interest. So today's agenda, talk a little bit about Office 365 incidents. We're going to do a little bit of a primer on the audit log, which is actually where you want to be spending a lot of your time if you're actually getting involved in this. 3 key traits for threat hunting. There's lots you can throw at this, so I've just chosen 3 core areas that will get you going if you want to start digging into logs and having a look at what you can actually find from doing that. So we're going to look at failed logins, successful logins, data exfiltration, and then we'll finish up on a case study of a real-life Office 365 compromise for one of our clients that brought us in after they'd noticed an issue, and we did the reactive incident response for that. We did the log analysis, we worked out what was going on for them, and worked with Police Scotland to extract the data and present it in a way that could be taken forward by law enforcement. It is a real-life case. It's been anonymised, so we've had permission from the client to actually talk about it because they're keen that other people don't fall into the same trap that they did, and I'll just dig into some of the interesting facts that we found through doing that investigation. So, cracking on, let's have a look at the next one. Right, so Office 365 incidents. So this is our playbook for when we're dealing with incidents with clients, and we can get brought in at various different levels of this, from the original situational awareness, what on earth is going on, all the way through to containment and remediation phase at the end. And what we find, Office 365, because it's internet facing and the wealth of information that sits within that environment, it is a highly valued target from the criminal gangs. And what we tend to find is that we're being brought in at sort of stage 4, establishing the compromise zone and actually understanding what the incident is, because the client has already worked out they've got a problem and now they're trying to react to it. So a lot of the time it's very reactive, and we're being brought in at that later stage to then query the logs and give them some context. But we've actually got also a couple of clients that we work with on an ongoing basis, much more at the earlier level of the situational awareness, and trying to avoid an incident actually manifesting. So we're doing proactive log analysis on an ongoing basis, querying the logs and looking for traits of malicious activity, and therefore, if it is occurring, stopping it in its tracks rather than it manifesting into a full-blown incident. So certainly, the earlier you can engage with these logs, the better. But as ever, in the majority of cases, it's once something bad has happened is when we get the phone call. So I just wanted to throw out this slide for you guys to put a little bit of context around that it is actually a live activity. It's a real threat. This is just a graphical illustration of one of our clients based in Glasgow. This is login success and failure attempts to their Office 365 portal for 90 days. And that shows the spread of the activity that's going on there. Obviously, the red is the highly concentrated, lots and lots of activity going on, and the blues and the purples are 1 or 2 attempts. But as you can see, obviously, as you expect, up in Scotland, a lot of activity because that's where they're logging in legitimately. And then the rest of the globe is pretty much malicious activity hitting their 365 environment, with a huge concentration of traffic coming from the Far East. Now, in terms of attribution, we're not going to go down that route today because it's a very difficult game to play, and just because an IP address is associated with a particular region doesn't mean that the person sitting behind that IP address is of that nationality. So, we can just say the traffic is being routed through and coming from those environments. But you can see a broad spread, and that was just 90 days worth of logs, and that actually was 27,500 log entries for just that audit record. And to create this map and extract that out of that log set, it took less than 10 minutes. When you know how to do it and some of the quick routes in and some of the commands you can use, it's actually really easy to start digging into these logs. And that's what we're going to be doing today and having a look at for you guys. So, a little bit of a primer to put everybody on the same page. If you don't know where the audit logs are in Office 365, then this will be a handy little guide. You need to be going into your security compliance settings within your Office 365 management page. Now, once you go into there, you're presented with a whole list of options on your left-hand side. And what you're looking to do is come down and under Search and Investigation, there's an Audit Log search option. And when you click on that, you're presented with this wonderful GUI. I say wonderful, it is awful. You do not want to be doing any investigatory activity through this portal. It is the worst designed client interaction I've ever had. But basically, you use this to get the data out and get it out in a format that you can then actually use and interrogate yourself. So that's what we'll be using this for. And what you do is you basically select the options you want, the date fields, the type of record that you want, and then you download all results. And you'll get a CSV format. Now, you really don't want to be using this page too much because once you can set time windows for the log size that you want. So if you know the window that you're looking at, you can drill down. I tend to try and take the maximum amount of logs that you've actually got available. You've only got 90 days. It's a hard limit within the platform, and the 91st day of logs is gone. It's hard deleted. There isn't a backup copy that you can go to Microsoft and ask for. It is gone forever. So if you want to retain logs beyond 90 days on a rolling window, you have to be regularly downloading your logs and storing them offline so you can actually go back and interrogate them. So one thing I would definitely say to you guys is start collecting logs and keep hold of them because you don't know how far back an incident may actually span. One of the recent incidents we did, the actual attack element that gained them the foothold in the environment happened at least 95 days before we were called in. We couldn't see that traffic because the logs just didn't exist for that period of time. We could see what they were then doing from that point onwards, but we didn't see what that initial activity was. So I definitely say that. It is also possible to programmatically gain access to this data, and Microsoft have a lot of blogs and technical articles on how to achieve that. That's not the preview of this talk, but if you want to know more about that, come and see me. But you can build specific apps that will interrogate the data and extract it out from an API. So you've chosen to download everything. Click download all the results, and what you're actually going to get is something that looks like this. I've blanked out the user IDs just for sanity, but you're getting a mix of and this is wonderful. I don't know why Microsoft have done this, but it just makes life a little bit more tricky. It's CSV data and JSON data all in one massive spreadsheet, which is really, really frustrating because actually the interesting stuff is in the JSON data. So that audit data, that last column, is fully structured JSON data, and it looks a little bit like this. You probably won't be able to read that, but each record is its own self-contained record. It's standard structured data, so it's name value pairs, and each record is stored as an object, so it's really easy to interrogate and start cutting that around and carving it up as you need to support your investigation. And so from my point of view, it's absolute gold, and that's what we want to work with. Now, to actually work with that effectively on the command line, which is where I spend a lot of my time when we're doing log analysis work, I found that JQ, which is the command line interrogation tool for JSON, is fantastic. It's just a brilliant little JSON processor, so I'd certainly recommend that you install JQ, and a lot of the examples I've used in the rest of the slides make use of that, so play along if you want. So as I said, what you want to do, get the data out of the platform, and then you want to extract the JSON data out of the CSV format that they've thrown you, and start using that to do the rest of your work. So, moving on, failed logons. So, from my point of view, why am I interested in failed logons? So, I'm interested to look at brute force attacks, what's going on. You know, we can see a lot of traits of high volume activity, targeting individual accounts, or the same IP address targeting multiple accounts, depending on what their intent is. I'm interested in the location and the volume, and using all of those together to build a picture of what's going on with the logs and with that client. Quite importantly, you want to do correlation with successful login activity. So just because you've got a whole suite of failed attempts, you shouldn't go, oh, that's fine, they're all failed, I can just move on. Do any one of those IP addresses that sit in that failed bracket become a successful logon attempt? And if they do, was it somebody that just got their password wrong once and logged in correctly the second time, or is that actually an indicator of somebody has actually brute forced an account or has phished an account and has actually gained access to that environment? And that's where that location aspect is quite key, because if you can see that your staff are predominantly UK-based, nobody's currently traveling around the globe, and suddenly you're seeing log-on attempts from a different country, then you can start saying, well, actually, this doesn't feel right for me, and it will give you a focus to sort of go down and drill down further. I'll put these slides up on our website this afternoon. If you want to go and grab them from the blog section of our website, you'll be able to read the commands a lot easier. But these are just three common commands that I'd use from the command line to actually do some of the interrogation using JQ. The first one is basically pulling that JSON file in that you've saved, and then you're selecting the operation value, and you're asking it for a user login failed, and then you're sending the data that you extract out of that to an output file. Once you've got that output file, you can then re-interrogating it, use JQ, and you can actually extract client IP. Now, the one thing I found there is you do really need to use the JQ-R flag, because it actually strips out the double quotation marks that would be returned. So it just makes your processing of the data that comes out that much easier, because then you can run scripts to go and interrogate that IP address against known IPs or whois lookups to actually find out what's associated with it. And then if you want to do something really quick and nasty, you can just basically cat that file that you've pulled out of the IPs. You can sort it, you run unique, you count, and then you can actually see the volume of matches against a unique list of IPs. And if you sort it in that order, you'll see the high offending ones first. So what does that look like? Very basic example. At the top you can see there's 99 failed login attempts from one single IP address. Now that's clearly going to jump out at me, and I'm going to go, that just doesn't feel right. How come there's so many failed attempts in such a from one particular point of view? And then that allows you to then go back into the data and query the data for who is that IP address actually targeting. And when you go back and have a look at the data, I've blanked out the user ID, but you can see here there is just attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt, and that user ID was all the same user ID. So that is somebody having their account brute forced. And this is part of the problem of Office 365 and the way it's designed to be user-friendly. Microsoft do not want to do throttling. They don't want to do account lockouts unnecessarily, because they don't want you to not be able to interact with the service. It has to be seamless and user-friendly. So you're leaving yourself open to, if you use a weak password and somebody's willing to spend a long enough time on a password list, they can basically keep going until they do find a successful compromise. So that's how that one looks. Successful login, again, interested in location, but actually more about login velocity. So for me, login velocity is about somebody has logged in from location A, and then 20 minutes later they've logged in from location B. The two are so geographically dispersed that it's impossible for them to have been in those two locations in that time frame, or it's very highly unlikely that they're using a VPN and switching between those environments. So again, giving me concern that there's something strange going on, and I want to interrogate that activity more deeply. Again, the reverse correlation of that activity with failed logins, you should be comparing those two lists side by side. And again, to do that successfully, what we're looking to do here is with the JQ query again. This time we're looking for the user logged in operation field. That's fine. But I actually then found, when doing a lot of this work, that there's two other options here, which is password login initial auth using password, fantastically long audit record, and also mailbox login. So Microsoft are tagging logins in different ways in their audit regime, so you need to be aware of that to drag them all out, otherwise you'll be missing part of the puzzle. And then also with successful login events, it's client IP, but also you can get client IP address as a record as well. So you need to extract both of those out and then merge those two lists together to get a full coverage of that. Otherwise, you can get a whole lot of null values in your record. So you need to combine those two together to get a full picture. So again, it's just a little quirk on the system when you're actually pulling all of this data out and making use of it. So I'll give you an example of the login velocity. Now, you're probably not going to see a huge amount on this, this picture because of the granularity of the screen. But again, this is an Edinburgh-based company, so you can see the majority of the access, as you'd expect, coming from the IP addresses associated with their office environment. And they do travel around the UK, so you can again see a lot of access there. What you probably won't see too clearly is you've got access down here in Nigeria, you've got access in the UAE, and then you've got two other accesses which were quite interesting for me, so I've highlighted them with the red circles. You've got Singapore, and then you've got Finland. Now, they were on the same day, 8.5 hours apart in login time span. Now, I had a quick check on flights. There is only one direct flight a day between Helsinki and Singapore, and that takes 11.5 hours. There is no way that that individual was in either of those two locations at that point in time. And in fact, when I spoke to the person that owned that mailbox, they were in the UK. They hadn't even travelled outside of the country. So again, hugely indicative of you've got a problem with your environment and your emails have been compromised. And you can see that this was over a 90-day period, access coming from lots of different geographical places. And this is all successful logins. So this is people accessing your email. This is not people trying to access. This is actually people who have valid credentials for that portal. So that's where we're looking at there. So moving on. Data exfiltration is another area I like to have a look at when I'm doing interrogation of logs. We find in a lot of cases the malicious agents are very, very smart. They take the path of least resistance to do the activity they're doing, and because you've got Office 365, you'll have OneDrive and SharePoint. You've given them the means to store data that they want to extract out of your environment and then get it out of your environment without having to email it or do anything else with it. So what we have found is a lot of OneDrive folders being set up and shared, and then somebody else coming in from the outside to access that drive and take the data out of the environment using your own infrastructure against yourself. So for me, I like to look for weak folders and file permissions from the audit logs. So basically what you can have here is you don't have to have an incident, you don't have to have a compromise. You can have your staff doing things in an insecure manner that they're not aware of, that they're leaving themselves open to potential future data loss. So you can do what's called sharing inheritance broken events, where if anybody here use OneDrive, where you click on create a link I can share this link with people so they can just access this folder. That breaks file permissions. Anybody with that link can gain access to that folder. It's basically a direct object reference type of issue. So with that, I don't have to authenticate with the platform. I can just click the link, go and grab the data. And that's how the malicious agents will share that. But also you can create anonymous links as well. So there's two main streams of activity that I'd go hunting for when I'm looking through my logs and extract that information out and take a look at it. So yeah, as I said, you can educate your staff. If you're seeing that they're using or they're breaking the shared inheritance, you can educate them that actually you don't know who gets hold of that list. Anybody could then get hold of that data, but equally malicious agents are using it for their own intent. And again, we saw that with one of our incidents that we were dealing with a client. We'll go into that one in a minute. Where they use that exact approach to gain access to the information. So I wanted to do a sort of a trial demonstration of data exfiltration out of a OneDrive environment without using any of the sensitive data that we've collected from incidents, because sanitizing that is too difficult. So I decided to do a bit of rick-rolling for fun the other night. So what I did is created a purposefully weak shared folder on my OneDrive, and I created a Google link to good old Rick Astley in there, and then I used that shared link and I put it on Twitter. I literally put this up. Absolutely nothing to see here with a Google link. So this Google link takes you to my OneDrive, and then somebody visiting OneDrive would then have to click on the link within OneDrive to then go to the content, and if they bothered to follow that, they got rickrolled and they got presented with Rick Astley singing his heart out. I left it up for about 50 minutes. I didn't want it out there for too long. But interrogating the logs very rapidly, could start seeing hits against that, so I started having a bit of a chuckle, and then I extracted all the information and mapped it. And as you can see here, basically, a lot of the people in the UK started having a look at the link, and then a smattering of people across in the US. Of interest, when I started interrogating the actual IP addresses a bit closer, some of them were like OVH hosting platforms, which are often used by security individuals that want to hide what they're doing and send their traffic from a server rather than from themselves, which I found quite interesting. And in the morning, when I got into the office and I was explaining what I was doing, one of my staff was looking a little bit sheepish, and he then put his hand up and admitted to being rickrolled because he couldn't help himself and he followed the link, which made me chuckle even more. But again, it just shows you that with interrogating the logs, you can get good insight into what's going on, and that was just looking for use of anonymous links, extracting it out, extracting the IP addresses, and then mapping them. And again, that probably took less than 10 minutes to do the post-analysis on that. It doesn't take much effort to do when you know the process to follow and how to use JSON in its best way. So that was quite good fun for what we were doing. Now, towards the end of last year, we got the usual phone call from a client. They were in the middle of an incident. All they knew at that time is they had had a financial loss, and they were still trying to understand exactly the mechanisms of that loss, and more importantly, how widespread any potential compromise was within their environment. So we got brought in. Very quickly, it had all the traits of being an Office 365 compromise, so that's where we started looking into the logs to try and quantify that a little bit more. So company lost £140,000 through malicious invoicing. So what's happened here is the accounts department have received emails from the MD and the CFO requesting a payment to be made, authorising the payment using the proper due process, the accounts team making the payment and providing remittance advice to the CFO. Unfortunately, the CFO and the MD were completely blind to this. They weren't aware that this was going on, and it wasn't until a review with the accounts team to how to code and allocate some of the spend that it came to light that this was been going on. And then they looked back across some invoices and they worked out it had been going on for 3 months. So not a great place to be in for them. We came in, were able to confirm that it was only the CFO and the MD's accounts that had actually been compromised. We could see access to both those accounts from IP addresses that could not be substantiated as being legitimate. And we could see persistent access and, quite interestingly, a lot of mailbox manipulation over that period of time. So these guys, the fraudulent team that were conducting this attack, were in the mailboxes on a daily basis. They were logging in, they were reading emails, the corporate emails, they were checking to see what the CFO and MD were doing, and they were waiting for their time to be able to hit and extract the money. And what they were waiting for is people to be sick, traveling, or on leave. These guys will take their time and they will map out what's going on so they get the most impact from their side. And they waited until the CFO and MD were both out of the office and not going to have easy access to email. And then they start emailing each other. The malicious agents are emailing each other from these accounts, creating a plausible narrative as to why an invoice should be paid, and then they're forwarding that email to the accounts team. Now, none of this is spoofing, so there's no pretend email accounts and mistyped domains. This is their email addresses being used. So what they're also doing in the background is creating mailbox rules to delete those mails. They don't want anything left, so when the person does finally log in, they're not going to see anything. So all this was just being done and hidden and kept away from them, which was quite interesting. Now, we saw that there was 23 Nigerian-based IP addresses associated with the fraud. Now, we know from other activity and research and other papers that have been written that there is quite a lot of this type of fraud that is conducted from that region. We can't go into attribution because we didn't go that far in our investigation and it's not our intent to. We can just say the traffic came from Nigeria. I also know that it came from 2 machines. By fingerprinting and profiling the browsers that were being used to do this, it was 2 machines across those 23 IP addresses, and all 23 IP addresses came from one Nigerian dial-up ISP. So it gives me a high degree of confidence that it was 2 people just dialing up and getting new IP addresses, and therefore they were conducting the attack. Now, also quite interesting was that when we had a deeper dive into the logs, that was quite easy to see because they're in there all the time, so there's lots and lots of traffic coming from them. When the fraud had been conducted and they'd had a remittance advice sent back, they then used OneDrive for that data exfiltration. So they would create a folder, drop the remittance advice PDF into that folder, do the weak sharing of that file, create a link, and then that link through another medium was being shared. And we then saw a UAE-based IP address doing one activity only, and it came in straight into that folder. They don't have to authenticate because of the way the link's been created, access the remittance advice, and then delete the folder. That's the only thing that UAE-based IP address did. It never logged into the email accounts. It didn't do anything else. It just came in and grabbed the remittance advice. So we now can implicate another actor in this fraud that is controlling some of that activity. And the conjecture there is you've got the guys on the ground, the foot soldiers committing the fraud, but they don't have access to the mule accounts where the money's being paid out into. That's somebody further up the food chain in that criminal enterprise that has the access to then go in and get that money and move it on again. So that was four records out of 90 days worth of logs that allocated that activity. And it would have been easy to miss due to that. And one of the other things we were able to show within the investigation was actually there was a wider compromise of the CFO's email account. We could see logins from different aspects of the globe, lots of countries, and different time spans to when the frauds were being committed. So it appears that the compromise of the account had possibly been traded on the internet for some form of monetary gain, and other people were gaining access to that information. So for us, quite an interesting investigation. It was a very short, sharp effort. All of this was done in a couple of days. This was not a long, drawn-out forensic activity. This was get in, get the logs, interrogate the logs, and start making sense of what we're seeing. Unfortunately, had these guys been doing that as a proactive activity on an ongoing basis, the fraud would have been spotted probably even before the first payment had been made. Unfortunately, we get the call at the wrong end of the spectrum, and we're brought in to do that reactive look backwards. And we've spoken to clients that actually haven't even enabled auditing on their Office 365 logs either. So I advise any of you, if you have clients that are using Office 365 or you are using Office 365, go into the audit portal, make sure that they're enabled, because they'll only start collecting logs from the day you've enabled it, and then they'll, as I said, maintain them for 90 days on a rolling period. Some of the learnings we took from this: users need to be educated about OneDrive and how to use it correctly so you don't create weak links. Multi-factor authentication on login, you have to enable it. If you guys have Office 365, people will be trying to brute force it. They're not interested in who you are, they're just interested in compromising an account. They'll worry about who you are post that compromise. And if they can conduct a financial fraud, they probably will try to. If they can't, they'll use your legitimate account to spam other people to try and get access to other systems or to have another gain. So enable MFA. Conscious time's ticking on, so I think at that point I will happily turn it over to some questions.
Thank you very much, David. Very, very interesting. And if you don't think it can happen to you, then guess again, because it can happen to anybody at any time. Do we have any questions for David? Come to you in a minute.
Thank you. So it was really interesting, and thank you for the talk. But most of what you showed is a reactive way. Is there any proactive thing you can do in O365 to?
Yeah. So from the audit log perspective, you are constrained by having to get the audit data out, and there's a slight lag. And I think it's probably only about a 15-minute window, so you can get quite close to real time. But to do that, you're going to have to go down the programmatic route of building an app that is authorized by Microsoft, has the right keys, and then you can actually build the API calls to extract the data, and then obviously just build it into a SIEM platform. But you're still going to have a lag, is what I'd say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just a quick one. You said a wee second ago there about obviously they were brute forcing the accounts and obviously got the username, password, got logged in. What I'm wondering is if you enable your two-factor authentication and obviously like sends a PIN to your mobile or something like that or through an authenticator app, does that eliminate that, or is there other ways and means that they could get around that?
You're changing the dynamic. So if you don't have MFA enabled, you're basically reliant on a really, really strong password. it not existing in a password list or won't be compromised over a period of time. But it's in the hands of the attacker just to spend time in doing that. With MFA, what you're actually doing is making that secondary interaction with the login process. So now you're changing it from being just targeting the platform to targeting the user, and you're actually going to have to do some form of phishing, man in the browser type of attack where you're getting a lot more complicated. So you're limiting the amount of people that can play in that space from an attack perspective and making it much more going after an individual rather than just going after a faceless email address.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi. I wasn't sure exactly how the OneDrive sharing kind of thing came about, but is there people out there that are kind of using crawlers to find anonymous links within OneDrive? Is that part of the kind of the issue here?
No, I've not seen that. Mainly because the construct of the URLs, it would be difficult to enumerate. So they've got that part right. It's people that are inadvertently... So a malicious agent would have created that link so they know what the link is, so they can share that with their other malicious agents to get that access. If you are creating a folder for your legitimate work purposes and then email somebody the link, you don't necessarily know where that email will end up, who else will read that email, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that you're opening up the opportunity if anybody came across that link, they can have direct access to that document.
Thank you very much. We have time for one final question. I'll come back up to you. Thank you.
Hiya, I'm Jay. Great presentation. What you described there is a more sophisticated attack, but usually it's sad to see more organizations just falling for phishing and spoofing emails for CVO fraud. Are you noticing more organizations taking a proactive approach for security awareness training, phishing training for users? Because in the end, users are the key.
Yeah, no, definitely. And actually, we ourselves deliver a lot of simulated phishing engagements for our clients to help them understand their exposure. So we do see a lot of clients more interested in understanding their exposure to that. A recent test we did, 82% of the staff still fell for a very generic phishing attempt, even though they've been through a training and awareness package. So there's still quite a big delta there to get through. So part of it is helping clients understand, how real is that to them? How likely is it that staff will click on links, follow, or give away sensitive credentials? And can you remediate some of that by proper training awareness that's targeted to that and getting your staff to really think it through? And what we find is actually teaching staff how to protect themselves at home, their Facebook, their LinkedIn profile, and their other social media that's important to them, they'll translate that back into the workplace. If you try and tell people just protect work information, actually they sort of get a bit numb to that. So teach people how to protect themselves, and then it will come across. But you're only going to reduce it to a certain level. And once you've worked out what that level is in the exposure, then it's understanding what other technical controls you need to put in place to sort of limit the impact. So browser hardening. So yes, they might click on a link. So how do we actually protect the browser a bit better? How do we put endpoint protection in that might stop the common attacks that are coming in? How do we make sure that when they do something wrong, they know how to escalate it internally and don't fear that they're going to get told off? We had a ransomware attack recently where the member of staff had the splash-up screen saying your files are being encrypted, and they just dragged the warning to the right-hand side of their desktop and kept on working for 2 days. So, we need to educate people how to react and take the fact that they're not going to get shouted at if they do, and actually have the wherewithal to pull the cable out the back of the machine. Do something proactive that's going to stop the issue getting worse. And we don't do that enough.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So next up,
Brilliant.
we have, thank you very much, David. Round of applause for David.